Welcome to Toy-polloi.
Hello and welcome to another video from Toy-polloi, and in today's video we're going to be working out how to make a very commonly missing part on a vintage Transformers G1 Blurr. Now when you collect Transformers there are lots of pieces that are often missing, and one that it really is very commonly missing is the little front section that goes on Blurr. It's used as his shield when he's in robot mode, but in car mode it essentially is the front hood of the vehicle, and without it you can see he looks a bit odd in car mode, or sort of a spaceship mode, whatever he's supposed to be. So I thought it would be fun to have a go at trying to make a replacement one of those just using some styrene sheet. I've been having quite a lot of fun recently making some missing parts to Transformers. You'll have seen this here on the main channel, but also as exclusive videos for my Patreons and YouTube channel members. I've recorded a few videos for them, fixing up Warpath and Blast Off. If you want to become a YouTube channel member or Patreon, then follow the links in the description. It costs as little as £1 a month. You get early access to all my videos, and you get access to On the Cutting Mat, which is an extra set of videos that I'm recording just for Patreons and YouTube channel members. So check those links out. But today we are going to be working on Blurr's missing shield. So let's take a look at the shield and see how we can go about making it. So this is how you often find Blurr missing this shield piece. It's a very commonly lost element of this toy, and the idea is that this clips into the front of this in vehicle mode, and you can see it finishes off the look and makes him look like a spaceship. Without it, he just looks a bit strange. So the plan is to make a replacement one of these. Now I'm going to be using just some offcuts of styrene sheet. I've got various thicknesses here. I've got some 2mm, I've got some 1mm, and I've got some 0.5mm. And I think from that we should be able to make something that is pretty close to this, because actually when you break this down into its sort of main parts, it's a fairly basic shape. We've got a wedge shape here with a little sort of indented bit at the bottom. There's a cutout there, and then we've got some side panels. On the underside, it doesn't really matter too much what we've got. There's a post there which fits into Blurr's hand, and then there's this clip here which clips onto a section on the underside of Blurr's body. So I reckon we can actually make something sort of based on this fairly easily, just using a few measurements and some careful cutting. In fact, most of the measurements I think will be taken off the toy itself, because we've got to measure a bit that fits exactly in there. So yeah, let's just get cutting and making and see what we can come up with. I think we should be able to make a shield pretty easily. So the first thing to do is to cut the sort of basic shape. So you can see here I've already drawn out the top section of the missing shield, and for this I didn't even really use the shield. What I did was I placed this onto a piece of 1mm thick styrene sheet, traced around the top section, because that's obviously the bit that we're really worried about, and then I just took a couple of measurements of this. I took the measurement from the sort of midpoint there where this cutout comes down, so I took a measurement from there to the bottom of this blue strip, which works out at 32mm, so I measured a line down there, and then I measured the width across the bottom, which is 19mm. I've drawn 19mm across there, and then drawn from the corners down to the end of the 19mm line that's at the bottom, and that gives us our basic shield shape. So I now need to cut this out. It should be fairly simple to do because this is only 1mm thick styrene, and we'll see if that fits, and that will be the sort of the basis of everything. Once we've got that, we can start constructing on top of it. But the key part of this shield is actually this top section here. If this matches with the rest of Blurr, everything else should just fit into place. So let's get this cut out. And there is that first shape cut. It looks like it should fit, so let's hold this up against the rest of Blurr. Yeah, that is going to fit really pretty well. Now I need to do some extra details onto this, and I've got myself a new tool, because if you look at this front panel, you can see that we've got some scored lines here, little panel lines, and these are actually indented so you can feel them with your nail. There's more here, and I wanted to try and recreate those on the one that I'm making, so I bought myself this, which is called, If we turn it over, it is called a plastic scriber too. This is made by Tamiya, and if I put the blade out, you have to unscrew that so we can put the blade out. You can see we have a hooked blade, and the idea is that you pull this along the surface and it cuts out a little V groove. So I'm going to give it a go on this. I've marked out where I want to add the groove, so I've got to do along that line there, and then I've got to do around this little sort of area here below where the rub sign goes. And this should give me some nice little grooves to sort of indicate panel lines. So let's just give it a go. Just doing it quite gently because I'm not really sure how far in I want them to go, but yeah, that has definitely added a little sort of indent there, a little panel line. I think I'm going to leave it that subtle. This is only 1mm thick styrene. If I do it much more, it will mean that it's very easily broken. So I'm going to do the rest of those. But this seems like quite a useful tool to have in one's collection. So I would recommend getting one if you're going to be doing lots of modelling. As you can see there, it is called the Plastic Scriber 2 by Tamiya. The next thing to build is this little attachment, and this clips onto a post inside, but there's also black pieces either side, so I don't think we need to copy this precisely. As long as we've got these two posts that fit inside either side of the post and inside the black pieces, we should be able to get something that sort of holds in place. So based on that, I've cut this tiny piece of this is 2mm thick styrene. It's just a little bit wider than the original piece there because I'm going to sort of trim down the edges. It fits nicely in the gap here, so you can see that when we stick that on with some plastic weld, it will fit nicely. And I have drilled a 5mm hole through already, which is just slightly small of the hole that's here. I think this is probably about 5.5mm, but it's better to start a little bit small. So I'm now going to start shaping that. I'm going to cut that into a U, get my plastic nippers out and cut that into a U, and then we'll start shaping this until it fits in place in here. Once we've got it fitted in place, we can then plastic weld it onto here, and that really will start to look like the missing shield and front section. A little bit of filing later and I've ended up with this sort of U-shaped piece, and this does seem to fit fairly snugly in that gap there. It doesn't clip in place, but it's snug enough that it will hold. So you can see that that is holding pretty firmly. It possibly could do with being about 1mm thicker. Not the whole thing, just this sort of front section. So I may just cut a small piece of 1mm sheet off and sort of do an extra strip down the middle, and then that will hold in place. But in the meantime, that is working pretty well. So we can actually plastic weld this front section onto here, so you can see that will fit like that. So I'm going to plastic weld it in place while this is in the toy, because that way we get everything lined up, and then we can take it out and finish off the rest of the shield piece. But that is starting to work really pretty well. So yeah, let's get this plastic welded on. I've got some plastic weld here. We don't need a huge amount. I don't actually want to stick the toy to this piece. I just want to stick these two pieces together, so I'm going to be quite careful where I put it. So I just put it on the front section there, and I'll push this piece on, and we'll let everything weld together, and then I can do a sort of proper bond later on. But for now, that's going to mean everything is lined up once that is set. The plastic weld has now had time to go off, and I have actually stuck an extra piece of 1mm sheet just on the underside there, and that's enough to give it a little bit more sort of firmness when it's held in place. So I'm very happy with how that is looking. We've now got to start doing some of the other details. So we need to add this little plinth at the front, which is just a slightly angled bit of 2mm styrene sheet, and I've actually already cut that just because it's such a simple shape, and I'm going to plastic weld that in place there. Then we need to make these side panels. Shouldn't be too hard to do those either. I think all we need to do is cut some strips of 2mm sheet and make sure that we've got the measurements correct. So one end of this is going to be, it's about 7mm, but we know that this sheet is 1mm, so it can be 6mm at one end and then down to this end is going to be 3mm, so that needs to be 2mm. So what did I say there? Yes, 6mm to 2mm. A strip like that cut, and then we'll plastic weld that in place, and then do a bit of sort of fine tuning and fine shaping. So it's a wedge, yeah, from 2mm to 6mm. That shouldn't be too hard to do, and it's all nice and square. There's nice right angles at this end. So yeah, let me plastic weld this in place. I will cut the side panels and we'll start putting everything together. Okay, so those side panels are in place. Now, in the end, I did change my mind. I went for a 1mm thick styrene sheet just because I realised this little panel that I put at the front was very close to the edge, and if I'd done 2mm thick styrene sheets, it would have caused an issue at this end. So this is 1mm thick styrene sheet, and I've added a little bit of support inside just to give it some extra strength. At the moment, this is a bit crude. I haven't rounded any of the edges. The original piece has nicely rounded edges, so I will do that in a bit, but for now we can test it on Blurr and see how that looks. Yeah, that is pretty convincing. I'm very happy with how that's looking. So let's do a whole load of sanding and round off all of these edges and tidy it up a bit, and then yeah, I think that's probably good to go. Oh no, we need to add a post for it to fit into his hands. I'll have to measure that. I'm sure I've got some styrene rod that's probably the same thickness as that. So yeah, a bit of sanding and tidying, then I'll find a rod and attach that as well, and then we can start painting.
Toyannoi. That is incorrect. Try again.
Okay, a little bit of fine tuning and modifications later, and I'm very happy with how this looks. I've added a few extra bits since the last bit of footage that I filmed. I've added a thin bar across here, so this is just some 0.5mm styrene sheet that I've stuck across just to finish off the front. So when you look, you can see those two look the same. I've added a post. This is a 4mm diameter styrene rod that I bought for another project, so just a little offcut of that I've stuck on the bottom there, and I've rounded the end so that it matches the original one here. And I have added another tiny sort of 0.5mm sheet bit of styrene there just to make that slightly thicker so that it now grips really firmly on the front of Blurr. I think that is looking pretty good. It's as close as I'm going to get. So we now need to paint this. I'm going to take this out into my garage, give it a coat of a plastic primer spray paint just to hide any of the sort of marks that I've made from sanding and sort of shaping it. And then I've bought some blue car spray, which is not a perfect match to this, but it's as close as I could find. It's probably more this shade of blue than this one, but then actually when you stick this on the front of Blurr, you can see there's only a couple of bits, these sort of end wing tips that actually match this front panel, so I don't think it will really matter. By the time it's painted up, it'll be close enough, and then we can add some detail. We'll paint this stripe on separately, and I have a rub sign as well. So yeah, let's go and get this all painted up. While we're waiting for the paint to dry, we can fix two really common issues with Blurr, which are the arms being incredibly loose. There are two parts of the arms. They're these sort of front wing pieces that fold down and then clip back like that. Those are often loose and don't stay in place. I've already tightened up the ones on this, so I will show you that in a minute. Then we have this piece here which slides up and down and is often loose, and when he's in car mode you'll find that often these are sort of drooping down because it won't stay in place. And that is the first thing we will fix. So we need to take the back of this off. There's just two screws, so we'll undo those, and then you'll see the mechanism inside, which is pretty simple, and that all you need to do is add one tiny piece of plastic to it and it will tighten it up instantly. So we take those two screws off like that, and then you can remove this lower panel, just unclips. And what you can see is we have this little bracket here. It's a very sort of clever little bracket. Basically, it's got little notches at either end, and you can see there are notches on this arm post, and that enables it to sort of lock in place at one end, and then you can sort of push it down and it will lock in place at the other end. But what happens is this middle piece of the nylon gets a bit sort of spongy over the years. So what you need to do is cut a very thin strip of plastic. This is just some 0.5 millimeter styrene sheet, and cut a piece that fits onto one side of this. So you can see there's a slight gap, a slight sort of indentation, so this piece of styrene just fits in there. So when we put this back together, you put that piece onto there, this bit goes into the arm like that. You can see that you've got the nylon piece there, that's the sort of rotating part of the arm. What you've got to do is take a tiny little piece of plastic and just drop it onto the top there. Then you take the top part of the arm and slot that over, make sure the plastic doesn't fall out. And then when we screw this up, this arm will suddenly be a whole lot tighter and it will stay exactly where you need it to stay. It's a very simple fix to do. You can do this in a few minutes, and you'll probably find most Blurs you find will have this issue. So yeah, just take the arm apart and a thin strip of styrene in there, or a thin strip of any plastic that's about 0.5 millimeter thick, and that tightens that arm up and it will now stay in place wherever you put it. You can rotate it, and that means that when it's in car mode, the arms don't droop down. Now we come on to these front pieces, and again this is an incredibly easy fix. These ones I've already tightened up, so you can see they're not too bad. They stay in place there and then they rotate and they stay like that, but often they are very loose indeed. So what you do is just take these off, they unclip, take this piece, just put the end piece of this into some just boiled water, hold it for sort of 30 seconds, take it out of the just boiled water, and then hold those two pieces together, push them together lightly. Don't push them too hard because you may end up snapping them, but just hold them together, let it cool off a bit. You can run it under a cool tap if you want, and that will cool it off quicker. Then once you're done, you can drop it back onto this, just slot it back in. It's very easy to slot back in, and that will then hold in place a whole lot better. So I'm going to go and quickly do that on this one, and it will make a massive difference, and it will just hold in place. I've now clipped that reshaped piece back on, and you can see this one really holds in place very well. It holds in the car position, rotate it up, and it holds back in the robot position. So there you go. That's all you need to do. Heat it up in some just boiled water, reshape the end by pinching it a bit, and it's that easy to fix. And there we go, the paint has now had time to dry, and as you can see I put a clear top coat on it which gives it a nice glossy finish. The stripe was fairly easy to paint on in the end. I just masked it off and then mixed up some acrylic paints to make it a sort of a bluey grey colour. It's not a perfect match, but then the main blue is not a perfect match, but I think it's as close as it needs to be. The final thing we need to do on this to make it look like the original one is add a rub sign, and I just happen to have one here. I buy these from the Toy Hacks website. They do all sorts of Transformers replacement stickers, and as you can see this rub sign does work. It's changing colour as I put my fingers on it, so we just have to stick this on, and I think that will be the finishing touch that this needs. It will make it look as close to the original as I think is possible for me to get with the skills that I have. So let's stick this on, just looking at my original off screen just to get the position right. I think that's about right there. Yeah, and that really finishes it off. That looks just as good as I was hoping. So let's try this back onto the Blurr figure that we got here. There we go. That looks so much better. Blurr without his shield or hood piece just looks strange. So a replacement one like that really is needed. I'm very happy with how that has turned out. It's been a fair amount of work. It's probably taken me about 2 hours in total to make this spread over a couple of days, waiting for bits to dry and sort of sourcing the paint and that. But yeah, that's certainly been worth it. Now I'm going to show it also working as his shield, because I know if I don't show this in the video, someone will leave a comment saying you didn't show it in being used as his shield. So here is the shield. You can see there's the little peg that I made, and that should fit neatly in his hand. And there we go, that's Blurr using it as his shield. So every part of this does work. It clips in at the front, and it will also fit in his hand. And that is Blurr now ready to go back on display. As you can see, he looks really nice. So I've got my original version there of Blurr with his original shield, and the scratch built one here on the right, so I can display him in robot mode and in his sort of spacey car vehicle mode. It's been a lot of work, as I say, but an awful lot of fun. I really enjoy making things like this. Scratch building parts is a very enjoyable part of toy restoration for me. It gives me a chance to try out new skills and new ways of working with styrene, and it always amazes me what you can make from just little bits of plastic and some creative thinking. You can actually make some really quite complicated pieces. And as I say, if you want to see more things like this and are really enjoying the channel, then why not think about becoming a Patreon or a YouTube channel member? It costs as little as £1 a month. You'll get early access to all of my videos, and you'll also get access to the On the Cutting Mat series, where I do more projects like this. If you've enjoyed this video, then make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the bell to be notified each time I upload a new video. And thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.